Subject: BI-41. Species: Malton, Ponty conversion completed. Description: Mammalian humanoid, no tail. 6 feet 5 inches, 1.9 meters, average height. 190 pounds, 86.1 kilograms, average weight. 99-year life expectancy. Ship: BI-41. Location: unknown. Here we go, BL-28 said excitedly as we neared the end of our warp. Brace yourself. We may have the advantage of surprise, but it won't last long. Once it wears off, there will be a wall of fire that will be difficult to dodge. Make certain you are secured in your C-dash. I was cut off as we exited warp, and a Mac round glanced off my shields. Less than a quarter of a second later, my early warning system came online, and I fired my deck thrusters at maximum to avoid the next volley. As the volley whipped past me, I acquired a firing solution and launched a Tluvran, bringer of Hell/Eternal Punishment, missile at the ship that had shot at me, and then fired my keel thrusters to counter my earlier maneuver. Almost immediately after I confirmed the kill, my EWS began blaring an indication that missiles were locked onto me. The missiles were coming from 2 different directions, which made things inconvenient for my point defense systems. I opted to gain a better position and made a run for it, pushing my primary engines to their safety limits. The missiles had been coming in diagonal from port and starboard, but were now firmly at my stern. I charged both of my Macs as I turned my starboard PDS toward the missiles, which conveniently aimed my Macs toward one of the ships that fired them. The enemy ship also turned its bow to me, but I triggered my Macs before it was able to gain a firing solution. My PDS took care of the missiles as my Mac rounds turned the ship to scrap. I began to charge my Macs again as I continued the spin. Another missile was already inbound from the other ship, but I had confidence in my PDS. I quickly worked to acquire a lock on the other ship, then fired another Tluvran before correcting my spin. I tracked both missiles and felt a bit of amusement at the fact that mine is faster. My missile impacted the enemy just as my PDS engaged their missile. I took a moment to survey the battlefield and charge my Macs as my missile's nuclear payload split the enemy vessel in twain. I had seen many of our ships take hits in the initial volley, especially the United Systems ships. So many of them had taken hits that I suspect that the Omni-Union may have been prioritizing them. I noticed that at 27, one of my fellow Ponty ships had been hit hard. It was difficult to tell how bad the damage was. Thinking that he may need aid, I began to approach him and tuned into the SciNet. "What is your status, brother?" I asked. "I have a hull breach, but I am still serviceable," at 27 replied. "It will take more than that to cease my functions." I performed a scan once I got closer and noticed the breach, as well as a sizable dent next to it. He must have been hit by multiple rounds. Thankfully, at 27's a tough old Blyvar, one whose skin resembles overaged leather, and I know I can count on him to push on even with a gaping hole in his side. He also isn't the type to take on students, so there wouldn't be any organics aboard his vessel. Before I could reply, I received an encrypted message that indicated it was from the commander of our strike team. I fired another missile at an approaching OU ship as I decrypted and opened it. Advisory to all units. It would appear that the enemy was expecting us. Our intel suggests that they have somehow managed to upgrade their subspace sensors. This is not relevant to our current orders, and they have not changed. Protect the dreadnoughts at all costs. Fleet Leader Onaya. "Look out!" BL-28 shouted, but I had already noticed the incoming projectile. "My perception is much more vast than yours, young one," I calmly stated as I blasted my starboard bow thrusters to minimize my profile. This maneuver didn't simply allow me to dodge the projectile, but also target the one who fired it. I fired both of my Macs half a second apart from one another. The first shot destroyed the shields and a good section of their hull, the second tore them in half. As I scanned for more targets, At-27 came closer to me. "Did you see the US ships?" At-27 asked as he launched a pair of missiles. "I've been busy, but I did see them get hit hard by the first volley." "Count them." Curious, I took a moment to analyze the battlefield and count the US ships. Their near-constant warping, while amazing, made this a much more difficult task than it had to be. Once I finished my count, I did a recount. 25,000 ships, exactly the amount that our strike team had started with. I wondered about the other strike teams in the system, but they were outside of my immediate sensor range. Regardless, the US ships had taken the onslaught bow first and hadn't lost a single ship. Neither had the Ponty, but there's only 5 of us. The odds of 25,000 ships walking out of that unscathed. "It can't be," was all I managed to reply. "It is. They are also ripping the enemy to shreds, and we should endeavor to do the same." When the United Systems had defended our forward scouts, the scouts had recorded as much as possible. During this defense, the US had utilized hit-and-run ambush tactics with their warp drives to quickly eliminate the enemy host. After reviewing this data, we knew that the US was experienced with warfare and had advanced technology. Due to their usage of near-guerrilla tactics, we had assumed that their shield technology was near equivalent to our own. Their focus had seemed to be on not getting struck by enemy fire, and we thought that a force with strong shields wouldn't bother with avoidance. Apparently, we were wrong. "Agreed," I said. "That's fucking terrifying," BL-28 whispered. "Oh?" I asked as I formed up with At-27 and the other Ponty. "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean for you to hear that," she said. "But yeah, the United Systems. The data we got on them suggested that their shields were on par with our own, perhaps slightly more advanced. But the volley that they shrugged off would have ripped our fleet to shreds a dozen times over, which means they have advanced shield technology and still lowered themselves to using guerrilla warfare. True. Which may mean that the wars they fought were so brutal and devoid of honor that it became the norm for them. Our ancestors used to believe that all soldiers should clasp hands and give each other time to prepare for battle, forming their lines and fighting with honor. Today we think these practices are stupid and silly due to the various atrocities that were committed during these honorable traditions, and the complete lack of consequences that followed. Which begets the question, what the hell happened to the United Systems to make them forsake conventional warfare? "Perhaps we'll find out one day," I said as At-27 identified a target for me. "Assuming we survive the present, of course." I fired my Max at the flagged enemy as we followed At-27 around the battlefield. He flagged enemies for us to target while simultaneously firing upon enemies himself. He was many years my senior, but I still almost had trouble keeping up. While we were engaging enemies and dodging fire, the US dreadnoughts were engaging the mobile prime platform we were assigned to. A quick scan of the planet told me how large the guns involved were, and I felt a wave of fear at the thought of instant annihilation. The dreadnoughts were taking multiple volleys from these massive cannons, and were dishing out near equal punishment in turn. The scale of it all finally hit me. Despite our blessed mechanization and centuries of experience, we were mere insects playing at the feet of titans. We had badly underestimated both the Omni-Union and the United Systems. I made certain to save all of the data that I had gathered so that I may share it with our leaders, assuming I survive. Joining with the United Systems or creating a formal alliance would be absolutely necessary. No matter how much one stretches their imagination, winning a war against the US is unimaginable. We would be completely dependent upon their mercy if it came to that. Even with all my knowledge, I can't begin to fathom how they've created such monumental weapons and shields. Was it specifically for use against the Omni-Union? How can that be? They haven't been fighting the OU that long. How had they managed to mass manufacture these Banzron, a mythical giant, similar to Goliath, in such a short amount of time? I was so focused on this that I was nearly hit by a Mac round, but managed to spot the incoming just in time and fired my keel thrusters to avoid it. A laugh came over the Cynet. "Watching the behemoths brawl?" BA-14 asked. "Can you blame him?" "I can barely take my sensors off them," BB-39 said. "Well, you better get your sensors on the fight," 48 Australian dollars replied. "If you don't, you're going to end up scrapped. Just stay focused." At 27 interjected. "Distractions will only—" He trailed off as the first of the dreadnoughts fired its main cannon. Despite the vacuum, I felt like I could almost hear it. I imagined it was like the high-pitched hum followed by a dull thud that my own Macs made, but exponentially louder. Before the shell even hit the MPP, the other two dreadnoughts fired as well. Despite my awe, I launched a missile at one of my targets. The missile didn't even get halfway to the target before the MPP split into pieces. "Wow," BA-14 said. The rest of us fell into silence and continued fighting.